Now, welcome to the session number 9. Yeah, my name is Jung-won. I'm a professor of Spanish and the director of the cross-cultural studies in Kyunghee University. And I'm very pleased to and honored. And then I'm very happy to be here as a part of the conference. Today, we are going to start with a very interesting panelist. Professor Chantelle Gray is an associate professor of philosophy in Northwest University, South Africa. Her recent article is titled 1956, Deleuze and Foucault in the Archives, or What Happened to the A Priori, published in the journal Deleuze and Guattari Studies. And her forthcoming book project is Anarchism After Deleuze and Guattari, Folding Cosmological Cosmologies. And her Professor Gray's title of today's paper is Fabulation in a Time of Algorithmic Ecology, Making the Future Possible Again. Oh, what an interesting title. I'm really looking forward to hearing. Professor Gray.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna just start a PowerPoint. Can you all see it?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let's try again. There we go.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent. So my talk really picks up on Deleuze's postscript on the societies of control, and also Guattari's 3 ecologies. And it's more thinking about where this is going. Okay, here we go. So in a letter to Jean-Baptiste Leroy, dated 13 November 1789, Benjamin Franklin wrote a line that has become an oft-cited truism, that nothing in this world is certain except death and taxes. But humans are notoriously good at dodging almost anything, including, of course, death and taxes. So you might recall the Panama Papers. Sending shockwaves through the world, this unprecedented leak of 11.5 million financial and legal documents for roughly 215,000 offshore entities revealed how shell corporations were used to bypass international sanctions and take advantage of cryptic offshore tax regimes, also known as tax havens. Needless to say, death is somewhat more difficult to evade than tax, but this has not stopped humans from trying. Life extension theories and technologies have been dreamt into existence by scientists, authors, religions, and cranks as much as everyday people. So after religious theories of an afterlife, the cryonics, or the low temperature freezing and storage of a human corpse with a speculative hope of future resurrection, was the decades-long leading theory for cheating death. Recent years have, however, seen a shift towards mind uploading theories and digital immortality. So mind uploading, also called brain emulation, refers to a hypothetical future process according to which the physical structure of the brain will be scanned accurately enough to create an emulation of mental states and the personality of an individual to then be captured in form. This emulation will in turn allow a computer to realistically simulate a person, as if the simulation had theory of mind. So digital immortality is similar, but differs slightly in that it is less concerned with brain scans and other biotechnology. Rather, it relies on a deceased person's digital archive such as images, social media posts, voice data, text messages, and so on, which is used to train chatbots or digital avatars to behave, respond, and think like the deceased person. So the 2020 television series Devs grapples with some of these issues. Drawing on French mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace's theory of scientifically grounded causal determinism, the series is centered on the Devs system, which you see here, a powerful quantum computer that can reconstruct moments and even whole histories of the past. And so I'm going to play you just a short clip to show you what this computer is supposed to do, how it reconstructs the past. So ostensibly, those were recreations of Christ and Joan of Arc. But more impressive is that the computer is able to construct projections or future projections, though only up to a certain point, after which there is nothing but impenetrable static, supposedly due to the breakdown of physics laws themselves. And this is possibly a reference to chaos theory, often referred to as the butterfly effect, which describes how even relatively deterministic systems nevertheless exhibit unpredictable behavior at times. So although wildly ambitious and steeped in hubris, it turns out the main objective for building this powerful computer is not world domination, as you might think, but rather something entirely more personal. The main character, Forrester, is trying to unite with his deceased young daughter via computational means, even if this means dying. After all, who's to say that living in cyberspace is anything different to the illusion that is life? So in the second season of Black Mirror, a similar theme is explored in the title, Be Right Back. Viewers follow the story of Martha, whose boyfriend Ash is killed in a car accident. While mourning him, she discovers a new technology that will allow her to communicate with Ash via an artificial intelligence that can realistically mimic him. So Martha jumps at the chance to be with Ash. Though the twist is, of course, that this technology, rather than helping her find closure, traps her in the past. So great lesson from Black Mirror, except it assumes that offline life is what people still primarily want, and that this kind of immersive form of cyber individuation is rather more reserved for so-called extremely online people who struggle with dealing with complex emotions, such as those associated with losing a loved one, and due at least in part to an overexposure to short-term neurochemical or dopamine hits related to the expression of simplified emotional responses presented for selection through emoticons. Oops. So the fact of the matter is, though, that we have all become extremely online people, in part due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has forced many people, and certainly most academics, into online environments for long hours of the day, with the consequence that various search engines and social media platforms using algorithms have increasingly been able to adapt what they present to us as an impartial view of reality based on how we interact with those platforms and others on them. The catastrophic general underlying movement of implosion and regressive infantilization that emerges from this kind of lifelike virtual life was, of course, foretold by Guattari in the three ecologies, even though he could not possibly have imagined quite what our society would look like today. One of the most extreme examples of this regressive infantilization is the phenomenon known as Hikikomori, first described by Tamaki Saito in psychosocial terms to explain a novel form of suffering experienced by people that manifests as an array of psychological ailments, all of which eventually lead them to withdraw from society for prolonged periods of time. Saito, who was trained in Lacanian psychiatry and worked as a psychotherapist in an institution near Tokyo, noticed this trend of withdrawal when a large number of people started consulting him about children who hid themselves away, retreated from school and work, and refused to go outside. Associated behavior patterns included truancy, suicidal ideation, domestic violence, agoraphobia, anthropophobia, and obsessive compulsive behavior. The protracted withdrawal was always the main factor. And so such avoidance may be due to previously experienced non-adaptation. A commonly cited response in the official 2016 survey on Hikikomori by the Cabinet Office of Japan. Such typical statements include, I did not adapt to the workplace or the university, or my human relationships were bad. It is small wonder that whole groups of society are opting for VR and gaming, the new real, where whole worlds of possibility can be found without ever going anywhere. You don't even have to talk to a real friend or psychologist anymore. Replica has an AI companion for you, a companion who is also you. And so this is what this app looks like. And it can become your companion, and you can choose your AI friend. And I just want to play you some responses to this because it sets up the problem that I'm trying to elaborate on here. So, what is the problem? Isn't this dream of complete mathematical and technological control over reality at least as old as the human ability to invent and dream? It is true that what legal theorist Antoinette Rouvroy refers to as algorithmic governmentality, by which she means the increasingly statistical government of the real ensuing from a convergence of contemporary technological and socio-political evolutions, can be traced back at least as far as first-order cybernetics, and before that, to Leibniz's calculus ratiocinator. So what makes the contemporary problem different, however, is that the latest technologies, for example, cloud computing, practically unlimited data storage, high-speed global communications networks, and most importantly, machine learning, and here I mean specifically new forms of connectionist artificial intelligence that, unlike older symbolic AI models, rely on multi-layer artificial neural networks that are assumed to represent the biology of human cognitive structure, have powerfully exacerbated the quest for and assumptions of what we might think of as algorithmic supremacy. As digital technology theorist Dan McQuillan argues, data-driven modeling by statistical induction is assumed to bear inherent significance. But this approach, which McQuillan describes as a form of machinic Neoplatonism, tends to entirely elide the broader subjective and intersubjective contexts within which analyses and modeling unfold, and is thus, via this unwarranted delimitation, able to present itself as operating with a level of mathematical objectivity it simply does not possess. So this creates several insidious problems. For one, as Bernard Stiegler observes in The Age of Disruption, this deferral to the superiority of algorithmic reason legitimizes the systematic exploitation and physical reticulation of inter-individual and trans-individual relations in the service of the data economy. In other words, the kinds of transgenerational, intergenerational, interpersonal, personal, and even pre-personal circuits that used to emerge through affective relations of various kinds over time within and across societies to forge dreams, goals, objectives, and common horizons have been disrupted in unprecedented ways. Rouvroy argues, in fact, that subjectivity is bypassed by contemporary digital automation, so that subjects are rendered little more than a collection of intra-individual data that are recomposed at a supra-individual level under the form of a profile. The second, the speed at which algorithmic ecology is merged, as well as the level of technological literacy a coherent understanding of the shift entails, has far exceeded our capacity to theorize its effects, with the result that many analyses of our contemporary condition remain trapped in anachronism, projecting the image of an old world and its struggles onto a new and largely alien terrain. It is perhaps not too hyperbolic to claim, as many have, that the staggering technological shifts of the last 20-odd years necessitate theoretical engagements on the scale of a new geological era. This is no longer the world of industrial capitalism, nor of Foucault's disciplinary societies, Deleuze's control societies, or Guattari's integrated world capitalism, although all of these are vestigially inflected in the new situation. And so the third problem is that because of the speed at which digital innovation operates, whatever effects this new hypersynchronization of consciousness is having on subjectivity can only be perceived in the most minuscule of ways. Yet we have to rely on this minimum of information for symptomatology, because if we follow Deleuze via Nietzsche, it is only through symptomatology that we can trace etiological factors in order to find the most inventive corrective therapy. So, a difficult task indeed, considering the constraints outlined here. The point is, we urgently require new tools to grapple with the implications of the encroachment of algorithmic reason and governmentality into more and more aspects of our lives and minds. Far from eschewing a theory in favor of the transcendent mathesis universalis of our new digital overlords, situated thinking about our times has never been more crucial. If, however, this kind of thinking has not been forthcoming to the extent we would hope for, then this too perhaps forms part of the symptomatology of the Algocene. And that is, of course, a term that Aragon Elof came up with. And that is in the latest issue of Deleuze and Guattari studies. So in describing something that is unprecedented, we need to take care, as Mackenzie Walk argues, to find a renewed language for describing the present situation and identifying what in the received language of capitalism or Marxism, for those more behind the time, impedes forward movement in thought and action. Having said this, it is also important not to reduce the entire social field to algorithmic control, despite its near ubiquity. What is rather vital to understand is what this new way of experiencing subjectivity produces and what in turn produces it. As Guattari explains of the Freudian unconscious, it produced new desires, which included hysteria, infantile neurosis, psychosis, family conflict, the reading of myths, etc. A so too which Stigler refers to as negative collective protension, the nihilistic expectation of nothing, except perhaps the end, has produced new desires. And here we have to seriously consider that the end might in fact, and probably is, desired, even collectively so, especially given that we also face anthropogenic doom. At any rate, it seems clear that new modes of subjectivation have emerged in the Algocene. It is useful to draw some parallels between these subjectivizing processes and the form of computation or cognition exemplified by adaptive neural networks, or ANNs. A class of connectionist AI, and specifically the subclass of ANNs, known as generative adversarial networks, or GANs. So to give only the most non-technical synoptic gloss of the functioning of these systems, the ANN model operates by distributing a series of digital neurons on a layer. A deep convolutional network, the most common current form of this model, comprises multiple interconnected layers, including an input layer, where the data to be evaluated by the ANN is presented in a suitable format, typically an array of numbers or vectors, as well as an output layer, which represents the response of the network to the input data. So input data is initially used to train the network by incrementally stabilizing the weightings of neurons on each layer until a best fit or minimum error threshold has been reached, and subsequently, in a trained network, to present new data for evaluation. So typically, the training process involves a fair amount of human intervention, selection of the training material, for example, ongoing manual adjustments of weightings and thresholds, and so forth. But GANs largely bypass these forms of intervention by putting two ANDs, a trainer and a trainee, against each other. The trainer presents the trainee with inputs and attempts to trick it, forcing it to learn from its mistakes, while the trainer itself simultaneously learns how to trick better, creating a high-speed iterative optimization loop between the two ANDs. So this broad stroke account is not an entirely accurate representation of the technical details of convolutional neural networks, but the key salient feature vis-a-vis subjectivation is that the GAN system reflects a mode of automatically self-optimizing regulation or stabilization behavior that is echoed in what we observe as proto-autopoietic adaptations to algorithmic reason by human actors. In other words, just as the GAN contains a trainer and trainee, both of which are recursively modifying their behavior relative to each other until a desired optimality is reached, so too we can view processes of subjectivation in the Algocene as consisting of reciprocal training. In other words, the statistical aggregation of our data is modeled and presented back to us as an adaptive ideal, often with embedded social, existential, and economic exigencies. For example, access to work, healthcare, and housing. And our subsequent modification of behavior is then fed back to our digital trainer in a never-ending spiral that reduces our agency to a constant modulation of our data points, while erasing those aspects of us that are not amenable to exhaustive quantification. So this hyper-indexation causes human individuals to conceive of themselves as hyper-quantified. And this is, of course, what Deleuze calls the transition from individuals to individuals. The transition to individuation goes along with subjectivation processes of individualization rather than individuation. So individualization is thus a premature interruption or disruption of individuation. This is a crucial distinction in Stegler's account of how individual subjects and objects come to be in the world. And like Deleuze and Guattari's account before him, this is heavily influenced by Simondon. So in Simondon's account, which I'm just going to very briefly summarize here, which relies on thermodynamics, quantum theory, cybernetics, and various other cutting-edge scientific fields of his era, individual beings are understood as secondary to individuating dynamisms. What we understand as the everyday world of fully formed subjects and objects, argues Simondon, in fact conceals the primacy of flows and processes, which in turn rely on an inexhaustible pre-individual field, which provides the funds for the unfolding of being. And so this is roughly, of course, where Deleuze's concept of the virtual comes from. This unfolding proceeds through a number of phases, of which unity and identity of being are only one. It is only through grasping the full dephasing of being in these processes that we are able to arrive at a full ontogenetic account that does not rely on untenable metaphysical assumptions. So drawing on Simondon, and with reference to Horkheimer and Adorno's seminal work on the cultural industry, Stegler argues that the processes of psychic and collective individuation, characteristic of the life of the mind and spirit, have slowly but surely been wiped and are now exclusively operating in the service of the market and the organization of consumption. This disruptive process penetrates, invades, parasitizes, and ultimately destroys social relations at lightning speed. And in so doing, neutralizes and annihilates them from within by outstripping, overtaking, and engulfing them. For Stegler, then, disruption is the destruction of social systems by the technical systems, the dramatic short-circuiting of the processes or long circuits of psychic and collective individuation that have historically given rise to subjectivities. In simpler terms, algorithmic governmentality, unleashed by our contemporary technical systems and the technocrats, are decimating social systems and hacking the tertiary memory of psychic individuals through an unprecedented proletarianization of the mind. These processes of proletarianization, which alienate individuals not just from labor, but from individuation itself, deprive humans of knowledge, and especially of long-term and intergenerational knowledge. And so the result is an unparalleled crisis of meaning and the subjection of the future to an absolutely negative protension. So whereas desire is schizophrenized by capitalism for Deleuze and Guattari, it is for Stegler disrupted or short-circuited, preventing the transmission of intergenerational knowledge. To compensate for the lack of a collective secondary protension, digitized tertiary retention, which is an artificial retention, becomes the default. The reason finds itself systematically short-circuited. The reality of disruption is the loss of reason and the perfect completion of nihilism, writes Stegler. The concomitant hyper-individualism is sustained through short circuits, which radically alter the synthesis and metastabilization of time, and of course also subjectivity in time. Disrupted, we produce not reason, but deliriums of all kind. A collapse of any sense of self or group agency into the passive provision of data, powerfully captured in Stegler's reflection on many teenagers who no longer dream. How do we dream again? And this for Stegler is the question of our times, one deeply tied to the problem of producing long circuits of trans-individuation or of reaching consistency. And this is, of course, a problem Deleuze and Guattari discuss from a number of perspectives, such as the three syntheses of time, the body without organs, the plane of consistency, and the ritornello. Moreover, it is central to their positive project of schizoanalysis, aimed at ensuring the machinic conversion of primal repression and undoing the blockage or coincidence on which the repression, properly speaking, relies by transvaluating what is ill in order to produce healthier intensities, thereby causing the desiring machines to start up again. So in thinking about how to answer the problems of our times, I don't think it lies in some kind of return to primitivism or any other kind of return to a mythical better past. We are here. We need to find ways to deal with now if we are to rescue the future. The answer equally does not lie solely in reform, specifically legal reform. Rather, we need to ask what we want our societies to look like. And here we can look to the past for some ideas without returning to it. In short, we need to foster new forms of collectivity in the maze of individualism and individualization. And this requires radical new formulations of subjectivity that take into account the contemporary situation. For Guattari, this involves processes of re-singularization that do not concede either to an eschatology of technoscience or Hikikomori-style withdrawal. Far from the homophile groups of online life, this requires, as Guattari foresaw, an injection of heterogeneity, where individuals can be confronted with ideas dissimilar from their own and opportunities to talk this through rather than reactively canceling someone. It requires forms of offline life that nurture transgenerational, intergenerational, interpersonal, personal, and pre-personal long circuits in order to reach the neganthropocene, a place of dreams. As Stegler puts it, we must turn to the question of the dream in politics and the question of the politics of dreaming. These new social practices of liberation, yes, of dreaming, cannot be based on new hierarchical relations. Instead, one of the main goals needs to be the creation of new alliances, transversal politics that confers to these initiatives a character of living subjectivation and irreplaceable experience that is worth being lived, that gives meaning to life. In short, we are looking for health. Now, interestingly, for Deleuze and Guattari, as for Nietzsche before them, health is not opposed to illness. Rather, it is the immanent process whereby illness brings about its own autocritique and self-overcoming, as Aidan Tynan puts it. The illness of our time therefore needs to be transmuted in order to create new ways of living again. And this is, of course, the schizoanalytic project. The individualist, individualizing societies we currently find ourselves in have not only lost their means for healthier tertiary pretensions, but a memory of what a society is and can be. That which allows the development and co-creation of individual and social freedom, where material goods are produced in order to meet the physical needs of everyone in a society, rather than satisfy the insatiable requirements of capitalism, where free and equal social relationships are fostered, so that people can flourish mentally and emotionally, and in turn, develop their ethical and creative capacities. If this is the basis of our society, algorithms would have a very different function. And that, I hold, is more important than reform or the new tendency towards simply giving up. Thank you.